I like how it gives us permission. Like we have to say, okay, I got it.
Hello. Welcome to the SD 101 lecture for this month. We are going to be getting started in just a couple minutes. Let people have some time to kind of trickle in. Like I said, give us about 2-3 minutes. Just let people get settled, and then we'll get started. Right, we're going to give it just another minute or two. We still have some people coming in right now. Thank you guys for attending this month's SD 101 lecture, San Diego Between the Wars. Linda Canada will be presenting. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, looks like the numbers are kind of stabilizing. People are getting settled in. Thank you guys for joining us today. This is our presentation on the history of San Diego. This is also our 1-year anniversary of these presentations. Started last year at this time in June. So thank you for everybody that's been coming to these. They've been a lot of fun to present, and we hope to see you again in the future. We wanted to extend a special thank you to our members for all of your support. And if you're interested in any of our previous presentations, they're available on the History Center's YouTube channel. We will go ahead and put the link in the chat so you can access them if you'd like. So just a couple of things to go over before we begin. We're going to be answering questions at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A function to ask your questions, and we will be answering some of them as we go, but most of them will be saved for Linda. And then this presentation will be uploaded to YouTube in the near future. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Linda Canada, our esteemed host and presenter. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me back. I'm really excited to be talking to the History Center audience once again. This is a talk that kind of fits in between two that I do. I've already given you one, which is San Diego during World War I. This is the middle one between the wars. And then there's going to be another one, San Diego during World War II. And again, my approach is to more talk about what's happening on the home front as opposed to what's going on with the military and the buildup and the battles and all that kind of thing. So let's get started. Let's look at San Diego during the interim period between the wars. So So here I'm going to be showing you one of my favorite postcards in the upper left-hand corner. It's actually a little bit early, but I want you to give you the perspective of the changes that are happening during this time period. The upper color photograph postcard is 1911, and I have identified with the arrow.
Linda, I'm going to have you pause just for a second. It doesn't look like you've shared your screen yet.
Oh boy, I have it up on my screen. So let me see. How do I back out?
Did you click the green share screen button down at the bottom in the middle?
I did. But
okay, did you click on the window with the presentation in it?
So I'm going to end the show and start again because I don't think I did it right. Beg everybody's pardon. Okay, so do you see anything now?
No. If you click the bottom little green arrow button that says share screen, it'll bring up the options to share. You want to click on your presentation, your PowerPoint, and then.
Beg your pardon. Okay, so I have. Okay, I have the Zoom screen, but I am not seeing a nice little green arrow for you guys.
You might have to hover at the bottom to get the option bar up.
Yeah.
And then it should have a green arrow pointing up that says share screen. And if you click on it, it should open up a window that you can choose which screen you want to share.
I'm not seeing it, Sam. Sorry. Oh, is that right? I've got the male part of the household helping out here. So double click.
There we go.
Oh, good. All right.
You need to go to presentation mode.
Yeah, if you go up to presentation mode, we'll see it big.
Go to presentation mode.
I don't see it.
There we
You got
go.
it? All right.
We are
All
good.
right. Now it says I'm screen sharing. Let me start all over again with this beautiful color postcard from 1911 in the upper left-hand corner. So this was San Diego, and this is when we're a population of only about 39,000 people. So it's a very small town. And I've indicated the US Grant Hotel on this image and the image down below to give you an idea of how much growth there was in only a 10-year period. So the image below is 1921. So lots of changes in San Diego and a big building boom in particular. Now, outside the city, there was also a boom going on in agricultural development. We were a big agricultural center for crops that grow particularly well here in Southern California. So we had citrus like this Eureka Ranch property up in the Escondido area. We had many types of citrus, oranges and lemons. In particular, we grew some grapefruit, and then all throughout Mission Valley, down to Chula Vista, east into El Cajon, all where the rivers had formerly flowed and the land was very rich. We were able to have many different types of farming communities. So the growth was both in the outer parts of the city as well as in the internal part of the city. Another area that became very important in the 1920s was the growth of flowers and rootstock and succulents. And in fact, in 1932, the city of Encinitas hosted the National Midwinter Flower Show. And this area was calling itself the flower capital of the world. So lots of things green and growing all around San Diego. Now, how did they do that? Because we didn't have a whole lot of water. And in fact, a water historian has estimated that the amount of water we got naturally back in this time period was only enough to take care of about 50,000 people in San Diego. And by the time we're talking about, we have 75 already, and it's going to go way up from there. Now, the flume was what brought the water down from the Cuyamaca Mountains. That was supplanted by the first of many dams that were built. This is the Hodges Dam up near Escondido. Lake Hodges is a recreation area based in the water that's built up behind it. And then another dam that caused a lot of controversy in the latter part of the period we're talking about is the El Capitan Dam, built in 1934-35. And that's the one where the Native Americans were asked to leave the property in order that the dam could be built. So very contentious period. Contentious also in terms of who controlled the water supply at this point. There were key players in the battles that were going on over water. Fletcher family being the main one here, and Fletcher understood the importance of water to the growth of the community. So he acquired the land in the northern part of the county. He acquired land in the southern part of the county. Everybody was pretty touchy about doing battle with him. And so that's why dams were not built that impacted the San Diego River right away, because there was a lot of court battling that had to go on before finally that El Capitan Dam could be built in 1934-35. Well, what else was being built in this time period? Transportation, because we had all these people coming to town and lots of new housing being built, and we had to move them around because the Automobile was not in the 19 teens and 20s and even into the 30s, not a very common thing to see. And so the diagram that you see here is actually from an article in our Journal of San Diego History from 1988, the spring version, that talks about the history of bungalow courts in San Diego. And in doing so, it talks about how they were built along the trolley lines. And so all of the dark lines that you see in this image are trolley lines. So here's the central business district, and you can see trolley lines going up Fifth Avenue, connecting across with University Avenue, going up Park Boulevard and into Adams Avenue. So all of these areas where there was adequate transportation to get workers downtown, that's where new housing projects were springing up during this period. And one type of housing in particular was very interesting, and it was called the Bungalow Court. The image in the lower right-hand corner shows you a typical 1930s bungalow court, and they came in 4 different varieties. There was the double court, which is what you see here, that has a nice wide grassy area. Sometimes there was a seating area. There might be a fire pit. So 2 types of these larger types of bungalow courts, ones that had detached units like the ones that you can see here. So these are individual bungalows. They're like small self-contained houses, typically 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a small kitchen area, perhaps an area out on the back, kind of not even a patio, but just kind of at the back of the house, an area where you could dry your laundry if you were washing your laundry by hand inside the house. So very self-contained. And this was an extremely popular type of housing in the 20s and 30s, in particular for women who were just getting into the working world. And so they were living on these trolley lines and able to get to and from their housing by taking these trolleys up and down to the central business district, where the banks and other corporate enterprises were that would hire them, mainly in clerical and secretarial roles, but still it was jobs outside the home. And so you can see up in the University Heights, North Park area, the concentration of bungalow units. The author of the authors, they're both geography professors at San Diego State University. The authors of the article talked about how there were close to 800 of these bungalow courts built in San Diego. And that was second only to the number of courts built up in the Los Angeles area. But when they did their article, almost 50 years after the bungalow courts were built, they found that about 80% of the courts were still being used for housing. They were still very popular, and there were very few that were going on to the rental market. Well, housing was also going up in a lot of different areas following trolley lines. On the diagram here, you see that there's a line that goes up from the central business district and takes an abrupt left turn. And this is the one that went out to Mission Beach. And so once you have a trolley line out to Mission Beach, then you have developers starting to buy land for development. And John D. Spreckles, who was no dummy when it came to investing in San Diego, decided he was going to build an amusement park and a giant dipper roller coaster out in Mission Beach to have another reason for people to go out to the Mission Beach area. And oh, well, while they happen to be out there, he could probably sell them some land as well. Similar expansion was going on up in the La Jolla area. To the east, the last subdivision in Kensington Heights was being completed. And as the trolley line was continuing out toward the east, the whole East San Diego area was shortly to be annexed to the city, which meant that there was more room for real estate development. So you have a lot of transportation headed out to the east. You have pretty good access for people coming to the downtown area. So transportation becomes extremely important during this period. And it's not just the trolleys. In 1919, John D. Spreckles, that very wealthy businessman who relocated from San Francisco here to San Diego, was able to finally complete his San Diego and Arizona Railroad in 1919, which meant that there was now a direct line for transportation of goods to the East Coast. And what kind of goods were we shipping out? Well, remember all those vegetables and fruits I talked about? That plus with the development of refrigerated train cars, a lot of ice used, they were able to ship things like tuna, sardines, turtle meat was a very popular export out of San Diego. And of course, tons and tons of the citrus that we were growing here was shipped by the railroads out of San Diego. Now, Spreckels Line was not without its problems. It had some geographical problems. There were some fault lines that went through it. It did not do very well, but it was a major impetus for businesses to start up here in San Diego or to expand if they were already here. Now, as the population was expanding into areas that had previously not been built, such as up in the Mission Hills area, people became aware that there were some sites that ought to be preserved and not bulldozered up and put up for development. And so in this image, at the lower part of the image, you can see a very square shape. And this is the remains in about 1927 of the Presidio, the original Presidio that was built here in San Diego. So the Padres landed, they came up from the coast, and they built the Presidio on the hillside. It was later abandoned, but the buildings and the archaeology is still there. And so if you look at the image, you can see little square shapes along the edges. This is where these were storage areas and living sites, a lot of archaeology there. Along this side, there was a chapel, which was meticulously dug by students of Richard Carrico. And so we have good records of what the Presidio's chapel site was like. So Presidio Park was established about 1927 through the generosity of George Marston, a local businessman who acquired the property, gave the park to protect this area, and then later gave the money for the building of the Junipero Serra Museum, which is now one of the two sites operated by the San Diego History Center. And one of the unfortunate things that happened after this site was developed is that you see a big white swath cut through the middle of the old Presidio. And this is the road that was cut through and one of the parking lots that was created so that the Serra Museum would be able to have visitors. So it wasn't completely kept, but they did a pretty good job of retaining, covering over some of this property so that there are sites that remain available for archaeology to be done. Another site that was improved during this time period was the old San Diego Mission up along the San Diego River. The adobe had fallen into great disrepair. So in 1930, a group of people got together and contributed the money so that the mission buildings could be restored. And of course, that is part of it is still an active parish of the Catholic Church. Well, not only was there transportation increases and extensions of lines, but there was also industry that was coming to San Diego, and probably the one that had the most impact on the growth of the population of San Diego was by the mid-1930s when the aircraft industry really became settled here. And so you had not only Reuben Fleet establishing an aircraft company up around what would eventually become the San Diego airport here, but you also had Ryan Aeronautical, which was here, and Rohr Aircraft Company down in Chula Vista. So they were all manufacturing planes or parts of planes and very involved in this pre-World War II period of shipping parts over to Europe to be used by our future allies in fighting the war that was going on in Europe. The planes that you see overhead are an early version of the Catalina. which was one of several different types of aircraft that were built here at what became Convair and eventually became known as Consolidated Aircraft Company. You can see some white areas along the shoreline, and let's talk about what was happening along the shoreline in San Diego. You have to remember that there was not a lot of naval activity here in San Diego prior to the Exposition in 1915. And one of the reasons for that was that our harbor had a very shallow floor to it. There was a lot of sand and rock and detritus that had been deposited in San Diego Bay over millennia. And so in order to allow for any deeper draft ships, whether they are commercial or naval, to get into San Diego Bay, we had to do some serious dredging. And what you can see in the image here is one of the dredges and a dredge line, which is floating on the surface, which is then depositing sand into an area that was formerly part of the bay. So here's the old bay line, and then they have simply built a caisson. They built a large dam, if you will, in order to first trap the water that's there and pump it out, and then deposit the sand into the area so that they can build a new extension of San Diego Bay. So areas that you see white on maps from this time period typically are areas that have been involved in the dredging of San Diego Bay and the creation of the new land on which businesses, government buildings, a variety of things could be built. In this image, you can see one of the car ferries, which would be traveling back and forth between the city of San Diego and the city of Coronado. In the war years, definitely taking military people over. But remember, this is before the construction of the Coronado Bridge. So unless you wanted to take a trolley or a train all the way around the peninsula and come up the other side of Chula Vista to Coronado, this was the way that you had to get over to Coronado, was by these car ferries. So a new ferry station was being built here. There were other ferry places that you could catch the ferries to, but this was the brand new one. And what this area that's being infilled was designed to be was parking lots so that people could leave cars here and just simply be passengers on the ferry so that they could get over to work or jobs or shopping or recreational activity over in Coronado. Some things to note in the image. This is about 1934. Notice that we still had lumber yards down here along San Diego Bay. So still an important industry here. A new industry here in San Diego, this little brick building designed by William Wheeler, one of our noted architects here, was the citrus soap factory building. And today it's been incorporated into a condominium project, which is known as City Front Terrace. You can see the railroad lines coming through. The train station is just off image here. So this is really the key look of the Bayfront in 1934. But take a look at what has happened to San Diego Bay by the late 1930s. So the area we were just looking at is just here. To the south of it, this white area is the area where our convention center has been built. The area to the north of it involves a broadening of the actual shoreline is popped out. This is the area where the county administration building was built, just kind of near the Little Italy area. Tuna boats were at anchor and at wharfs here just south of the airport. The airport area itself was built on filled-in land, as was the Marine base and parts of the Naval Training Center. So all of this white, including a vast proportion of land at Coronado and along the shores of the developed part of Coronado. This is the area where that Country Club Estates is now built. But for a long time, it was accessed it was crossed by a bridge so that Navy and Army personnel could access their bases over here on North Island. So lots and lots of changes. And have you noticed what's not here in San Diego Bay? Remember, this is the late 1930s. What you do not see is Harbor Island and Shelter Island, which were built within the next decade or so. So lots of changes to San Diego Bay to accommodate a deeper dredging of the harbor so that Navy ships could get down, commercial ships could come in as well. Passenger liners were starting to come into San Diego. So we had a lot of transportation coming in by sea. We had connections to the East Coast from two different railroad systems, one Spreckles that went to the south and east, another the Santa Fe that went to the north toward Los Angeles and across the deserts. So we have become a great transportation center. By the end of the 1930s, the population in San Diego had grown to about 200,000 people. So we went from, in that very first postcard image you saw, from about 39,000 to close to 200,000 people in this short amount of time. But wait, there's more, because there was fun stuff going on in San Diego between the wars as well. Now, we've all heard about Prohibition and how no alcohol could be served, and there were bootleggers and there were rum runners. Here in San Diego, we were so close to the border with Mexico that all people decided to do was just simply go over and drink in Mexico and go play in Mexico. And so you had a bull ring, you had a racetrack that was built, you had a casino that was built over there. You had a lot of businesses that were designed to accommodate people who were crossing the border, to take advantage of their ability to gamble and to drink over in Tijuana. One major group of people who came down from the Los Angeles area and became very tied into San Diego and Tijuana was people from Hollywood. People in the entertainment industry came to San Diego for a number of reasons. One, we had a lot of very interesting scenic areas. We had the backcountry, we had mountains, we had the shore, we had a desert fairly well accessible. We had an Indian village that had been built in 1915 in Balboa Park, built sort of in the style of the Pueblo Indians of the New Mexico, Arizona areas. And that was used as scenery for some of the movies that were made here in San Diego. You had movie stars who were coming down here and going over across the border to drink and helping to promote San Diego and talking us up. So entertainment was a big deal. Now, Prohibition ended in 1933. That kind of marked the end of the Agua Caliente racetrack in Tijuana. However, 1936, we built the Del Mar racetrack and took care of those people who wanted to be able to play the ponies. And so our friends from Hollywood stuck around, and they continued to come down here and to enjoy the entertainment down here. Now, something else that was going on at about the same time as the Prohibition and the movement of people into Tijuana was the Great Depression that struck after the crash of the stock market in 1929. Here in San Diego, we did a little bit better than most of the country. And there was really one reason for that. In the 1930s, the then Secretary of the Navy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had come to San Diego on an expedition to explore the proposed new naval bases that were going to be going in the 20s and 30s. So when Roosevelt came here, I misspoke, came here in the late 20s, he looked around and he realized the benefits that could be had by improving San Diego. And so when the Depression hit seriously in other parts of the country, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was willing to send whole armies of works progress administration that is the WPA, and other workers who had been hired by the government to provide a living wage, but also to do some basic infrastructure work. And so one of the main jobs, aside from building public buildings and post offices around San Diego, the WPA was very involved in additional improvements to Balboa Park. We all know about the Great Expedition that was held in 1915 and 1916, and the area in which the San Diego History Center is located, where the Art Museum is, the Museum of Us is here, the Natural History Museum. This is the area of the park that, for the most part, was developed in 1915 and 16. But the areas that were below the Oregon Pavilion were mostly unimproved land. And so the area that you see in the bubble here is the area for which the WPA was hired to clear the land, remove the scrub brush, add in the electrical, the water lines, the transportation, and then to build the buildings that would comprise the newer section of the exposition that was to become ready to open in 1935 and continued in 1936. Now, these were two very different expositions. When the people and the leaders, mostly the men in the Chamber of Commerce of San Diego, got together to put together the 1915 exposition, their idea was to promote San Diego as a place for people to come, live, bring their businesses, bring their money, and to improve the size of our community. So it was very San Diego centric. On the other hand, with the International Exposition that was going to open in 1935, there was a completely different approach taken. You see, there was an international exposition that was closing in Chicago. And so our San Diego business people ran off to Chicago, going by cross-country train, of course, and went to the exposition and bought up as many of the exhibits and convinced the exhibitors, the entertainers to come to San Diego to put together a new exposition. And so that's exactly what happened. The major company that everybody knows about is the Ford Motor Company, which was here only for 1 year, but they added a lot to the exposition. They didn't stay for a second year. They weren't terribly happy with the way things were being handled, but that's okay because the building was being used. So there was an automotive museum, and there was auditoriums for entertainment. And one of the big differences between the 1915 exposition which was kind of viewed by people who lived here as kind of that old, dusty, old-fashioned exposition grounds. Part of what was new was, remember all those friends we now had in Hollywood? Well, they were convinced to come down here to San Diego and to create some boom, some jazz, some interesting things going on to make people want to come to this new exposition. And so one of the things that they did in particular was to add light shows. So there was lots more light in the exposition, all kinds of banners and flags. This was a building that was purpose-built to hold the lights that were going to be installed by the Hollywood lighting geniuses in order to give the great new exposition some pizzazz. So we had this purpose-built building very close to the Oregon Pavilion that put out the light for the new exposition. Here's the Ford building, which was there for 1936. It was quite a draw because it had kind of a mini assembly line going through the center of the building, and you could actually get in a fully completed car that had gone around the assembly line inside. It would come out on the side, drive it behind the building, and down behind there was a series of roads and plantings that suggested different countries around the world. So you would take this international drive around through the plantings at the back of the Ford building. It was quite quite the thing to do. Also, we had the Firestone singing fountains here in the front of the Ford building. So these are water fountains that were coordinated with music and light shows. Thank you, Hollywood. And so people would just come and sit and watch these fountains. Now, there's something new that has just happened in Balboa Park. And if you have not been here within the last year and a half, you might want to go down and look at that area near where the old Ford building, now the Air and Space Museum, is located, because there's no longer a parking lot in part of it. As of December of 2020, the city and the Committee of 100 have dedicated a new area, which has actually been renamed. It used to be called the Pan American Plaza. This is now known as Palisades Plaza. And it is an area where people can walk and stroll. There's a lot of umbrella tables. There's a better situated tram pickup point for the tram, which will be running around Balboa Park again. So it's quite a recreational area, and the hope is that with additional funding, they will be able to redo the north part of this parking lot as well. So new areas to look at in Balboa Park the next time you get to go there. Now, it wasn't just Balboa Park that was new and exciting. Down by the harbor front, we had a brand new baseball stadium in 1937. This is Lane Field. We had the Pacific Coast Padres, which played here for several years. And we had an extraordinarily good player with us for the first, I think, 2 seasons, a man named Ted Williams. He eventually went to play the rest of his career with the Red Sox, but he played here for 2 years, and you can see on the road and on the parking, all the cars that are here to go to the baseball stadium to watch the game. This, by the way, is Broadway. This is one of the Naval buildings which still stand down there. And you can see that we, even in 1937, still had a number of docks that had sprung up in order to accommodate various types of both naval and commercial vessels here in San Diego. This is an entertainment zone that actually survived until 1939. This image dates from around 1904. You can see the woman's dress that gives you an idea of the date. But this is Tent City down at the Hotel del Coronado. And so this was accessible by a tram line that went all the way around the peninsula on which Chula Vista sits, and came back up to the train station at San Diego, pardon me, where you could catch that tram to come over here. And so this was just there was a fun zone. There were restaurants. There was a dance hall. There were cabins, which were tent cabins. So they had a wooden floor, cloth walls, and a hard roof. And so you could rent these either to stay at the beach for the day, or that you even could rent them to spend the night. So this was in place until 1939, when construction of new naval facilities along this area of the Strand and Coronado meant that Tent City could no longer be there. Now, speaking of military facilities growing up in San Diego, you have to remember that here in San Diego, the Army had been the major branch of the military from 1850, when we had a first Army barracks that was built down on the harbor front. But really in the 1890s, when Fort Rosecrans, which is shown in the image at the left, was built, we had an Army presence here. And of course, they were riding horses. They were not very mechanized at this point. But you may know that the buildings, the officers' buildings on the site have been designated historic sites. And so they actually remain on the site, even though this is now incorporated into a naval base. The other base that was here was an Army, it was a base, but it was a canton. That meaning that it was a temporary facility. The image that you see in the lower right is part of Camp Kearney, which was built in 17, 19, 18 is supposed to house 20,000 trainees and 40,000 mules and horses. That's how the Army got around in those days. And so what makes it a canton is that it does not have many permanent facilities. What it has are redwood platforms onto which tents were raised. And so this is where the men slept at night, was on these raised platforms. The facilities that you see here would have been mess halls, latrines, recreational facilities, but not housing for the men that were here. Of course, the building took a while. They had to clear all of this land up on Kearney Mesa, put in the power, the water, the sewer lines. They had to build all these redwood platforms. They had to build the permanent facilities. That construction went on for 4 months. They had to build a new train link, a spur, in order to carry the redwood that was being used to build this facility up to the site so it could then be turned into a base. The first soldiers went over in about September of 1917, and the war was over very shortly after that in 1918. So we did not play, as a country, a big role in World War I. However, this base did play a big role in San Diego with all of the men who came to San Diego, many of whom got a pretty good look at San Diego and decided, you know what, this is maybe a nice place to kind of settle down. So some of the growth that we saw between 1920 and 1940 is due to men who remembered San Diego and who found a way to get out here and to enjoy some of the weather that they enjoyed so much. We did have naval facilities here in San Diego, but they were not active training bases like we got later. For example, here at what was called the Navy Destroyer Base at 32nd Street, we actually had kind of a destroyer graveyard after 1920, after the end of World War I. And so this was where the Navy just simply mothballed all of these ships that had been put into use during the war. Later of them, most of them were converted to scrap, and they weren't here. But this was the start of the Navy destroyer base at 32nd Street down on the lower part of San Diego Bay. Another place that both the Army and the Navy had facilities prior to 1920 was the Army above and the Navy below, each having air stations on North Island. North Island being the upper island, if you will. However, it was connected to the other part of Coronado by a stretch of beach. So it wasn't technically an island. It was the North Island, and that's where the naval station got its name. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as president, was called upon to decide who should have the right to use this space, the Army or the Navy, because they were kind of at odds with each other. They both had air stations here. The Navy had a traditional runway. The Army, you cannot see it in this image, but they actually use a circular runway so that they could accommodate landings and takeoff from any direction that the wind happened to be blowing. But these two services did not get along well. In fact, this is the only way that the men could come over from the main part of Coronado along this causeway. So typically they would take a ferry over the bay to the Coronado ferry landing, and then walk or ride bicycles over the causeway to get to their duty stations. The only problem was they took turns being in charge of who was at the guard station at the end of the bridge. And it was not uncommon for the Navy guys to make the Army guys late to report because they didn't let them through the bridge on time. And similarly, there was a little tit for tat with the Navy guys doing the same thing. So they didn't get along too well. And finally, Roosevelt said, you know what, Army, you can go someplace else. Navy, you get to have this area that is adjacent to the water. And so that's part of when we started building other major naval facilities here in San Diego. The upper image shows the beginnings of the construction at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. And I want you to look behind and how thinly populated the areas of Pacific Beach were at that point. Of course, it was going to grow much more over the years. So this is the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. You can see on the sand some of the old floodplain lines where the water would come in. So I mean, they had to take care of the water situation in order to build up the facility here. Similarly, and a little bit later, the Naval Training Center was built, and they added land. Some of this dredge fill was added to give a barrier to the buildings that were being built to house the recruits and train the recruits. So the image below of the Naval Training Center is from 1928. So you can see it's got some trees planted, and it looks fairly good as compared to the Marine Corps Training Depot, where this was under construction at the time shown. Well, by the late 1930s, recruits were in full gear and training at the Naval Training Station, and they did not have long in order to wait to be called into active duty. So we've got many naval facilities and Navy personnel, their families, who added to that 200,000 people, which we now find in San Diego at the end of the 1930s. By 1941 and 42, we find a huge increase in personnel. And that's what I'll be talking about the next time I see you in August. So I am ready to handle some questions if you guys have some.
So I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, but I thought I saw a hand raised. So if I see one person has their hand raised, I can't see who it is, but they're free to unmute themselves if they want to. Oh, I think it's Sylvia Contreras.
Sorry, this is Sylvia. No, I did not mean to have my hand raised. This is all
No
new,
worries.
yeah, this is all news, all new information, so I don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks for joining us. But so far, okay, we have a few more participants with their hand raised.
Hi, Johnny. You want to let Johnny unmute herself as well, or?
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, yes,
hear
do you
me?
have a question?
Yeah, that was great. It was interesting. I learned a few things. I thought I knew a lot, but I learned something new for me today.
That's my goal, is to have each person learn something new every time. So I'm glad you did. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And then we,
Looking for-
oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say I'm looking forward to the World War II one next.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to delivering it to you. I talk a little bit more about where people shopped and what clothes they wore, and a little more about being able to be a civilian in a wartime military city, which is what San Diego really was by the time we were involved in World War II.
Right.
Great. And then we do have a few questions in the Q&A now. The first question is, where was the railroad spur to Camp Kearney located?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because I think that spur still exists up off of Miramar Road. There is a Frost Lumber Company building on the right after you leave 805 at Miramar Road. And that railroad spur ran right behind there and then into the land. Camp Kearney was really the predecessor to the Miramar Naval Air Station, now the Miramar Marine Corps Air Station. So that's where Camp Kearney was located. So that spur was just left in place.
The next question is by Lisa. She said, my father told me at one time during his lifetime that cows were on the Kellogg Beach area and other areas to feed troops. Was that true?
I've seen those images of cows on Kellogg Beach, but I don't know that those were the cows that were used to feed the troops. I would really doubt that.
And then the next question is by Arthur. When was the land between Coronado and North Island filled?
Oh, that is a really good question. Let me see if I can dredge through my brain to come up with that. No, I can't give you a date. I will give you a date if you come back for the World War II talk. I will tell you that the area that was on the populated side of the island, the South Island, if you will, was made available for housing in the about 1959, 1960 or so. So that area is called Country Club Estates, and it's probably the most recent area in Coronado that single family housing was built.
Thank you. And then we had a question about the next discussion date and time, if we want to let everyone know when that is going to be.
I would be happy to do that. It's going to be the second Tuesday of August, which will be the 10th of August, and it'll be starting again at noon.
And then we have a question in the chat. It says from Mark, since the USMC Recruit Depot is 100 years, are there going to be celebrations or events on this? And do we have any plans on discussing it?
I have no answer for that. I don't know if you folks at the History Center have had any inquiries. I know they have a historical museum over there on base, and I would guess that any celebrations are going to be, based over there.
And same, I have not received any word from the History Center, but it's definitely something that we can think about as well. So thank you for the recommendation. And then I think we have another question. So it says, off the 5 freeway in San Diego on the side closest to the ocean, Sylvia was always told the facility was a military facility. It is not too far from Old Town. To her, it looked like hangars. Do you know the facility that she's referring to?
I think you're probably referring to the area that it's got a new name. I call it Spawar, but I think it's now Nav Corps or something. Those are government buildings. And yes, they are World War II vintage buildings. And that is the area that they, just within the last week or so, there's been information in the Union Tribune about a huge government private construction project, which will take down all those old warehouses and put in hotels and commercial zone and residential. And so that's all an area that it may be redeveloped soon.
Another question from Jane. When was Camp Matthews established? Much of the land was used for UCSD.
Yes. Actually, it's interesting. Camp Matthews was established with a name to it late in World War II, I believe. However, soldiers from Camp Kearney, which was active in 1917 and 18, used to hike up Miramar Road, and they would hike from the base to get to that site at Camp Matthews, which is where UCSD is. So they would go along the road that is now La Jolla Village Drive, except it wasn't a road then for cars. It was a path that the military used to get up, because there was an unnamed rifle range up there, which was used by the military in World War I. And that's the site that later became named as Camp Matthews in World War II. When I first started attending plays at the La Jolla Playhouse, they were using old barracks from Camp Matthews to house their offices and to hold their plays in.
Thank you. And then a few more questions that Sam pulled from the chat. From Kay, it said, what did downtown San Diego look like in the 30s?
What did San Diego look like in the 30s?
Downtown San Diego.
Probably much like the image that I showed at the very beginning of my talk, except with more high rises, because we had a number of developers who were building theaters, for example. Spreckles built a theater on Broadway just to the ocean side of where the old Horton Park and the Horton Grand Hotel was. The Fox Theater built a building that is now incorporated into our Symphony Hall building up on about B Street. There was another theater called the Balboa Theater, which is now comprised part of Horton Plaza. But at the time, about 1926 or 7 or so, that Balboa Theater building was built. It was a freestanding building at the corner of E Street and 4th, I think. So just, you see an infilling, you see a tearing down of little old single-story commercial structures and replacement with a 6-story high-rise with an elevator, with housing or commercial or other warehouse facilities. So you just see infilling. You see San Diego as a city downtown really increases in size until about 1960 or so, when there is a flight out to the suburbs. And so the building of the freeways encourages commercial and industrial uses more outside of the downtown area.
Thank you. From Kathleen, what is the status of the Naval Station today at Coronado?
Well, that's a good question. It is still there. They are still flying planes. I'm not sure that I understand the question. It is a fully operational Navy facility.
Okay, and then I think I see somewhere in the Q&A. From Sylvia, she was wondering if you happen to know of any types of tours that are available of those World War II warehouses that you were talking about in a previous question.
That's a really good question. And here is one organization that I know that is involved in giving public feedback to the people who are building that, and that is Mission Hills Heritage, which is a historical society up in Mission Hills. They may know. That would be a person to contact, somebody to ask if they know of any tours of those facilities.
Great, thank you. And I think that also answered her second question as well, about finding someone who can connect her, or people that can connect her with that. And then we have from Lisa, was Shelter Island a sandbar before it was built up and Shelter Island was created? Was it a sandbar?
I have seen pictures of it in the early years, and it does look like a sandbar. The diagram that I used to show the changes to San Diego Bay do not show it as a sandbar at all. It's just simply not there. So it is a man-made, and so that sandbar itself was probably man-made.
And then from Arthur, were La Jolla and PB in the city limits of San Diego during the interwar years?
Well, good question. Pacific Beach still is. It's a community of the city of San Diego. La Jolla incorporated as a city pretty early, I believe. So am I right there, Sam? You're making a face. Do you know?
You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Sam. Yeah.
Oh, she's probably typing.
Okay. La Jolla has always held itself out as a separate city. And I'm now starting to have as I'm thinking about it, I am not sure that they are incorporated as a separate city. So yeah, more research. I can report back when I see you all next time.
And then one more, Kathleen, she's asking about the history of the Naval Cemetery on Point Loma, if you happen to know any.
Are you talking about the Rosecrans Cemetery at the top of Point Loma? That is it's a military cemetery, And it way predates, dates from about 1914. Thank you, Sandy Woodhouse, for your answer to my La Jolla question. I was drawing a mental blank there. So yes, the cemetery has been there for much longer. I think around 1904 it was established. So it is a national cemetery.
And then for the last part, we're about a minute over, but we have 2 participants that have their hands up. So I'm not sure if they still have questions, but Sylvia and Arthur have their hand up. So I think Arthur's going to join us right now. Did you have a question, Arthur? You can unmute yourself.
No, I don't have a question. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. And then Melinda has their hand up.
Also a mistake. I did not mean to push that little button. I've enjoyed the appreciation, however,
Thank you
and
very
it's been a
much.
great presentation, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. And it looks like that is all the questions, unless I'm missing anything. So thank you to everybody that joined us for this presentation. Please make sure to come back for the next presentation. We will have this up on our YouTube channel as quickly as possible, so that if you do want to watch or show friends, family, you can find that on the YouTube. And Katie and Sam, if you have anything else to add, I think that's it. So thank you, Linda, and thank you for everybody that joined us today, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Great.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. See you soon. Goodbye.